Hello YouTube, I'm Darren Ruggan and thanks for checking out this video. In today's episode we're going to be pulling information from an API. This is a part of a public build series and I'll put a link in the cards if you want to watch the other ones. But if that interests you, let's get into it. On today's video we're going to be doing some data retrieval using an external API. That external API is the Pokemon API, which I'll put a link in the comments below and you can go check it out yourself. We're not going to go too deep into all of the API. In this video, it's more about being able to retrieve information and display it on screen. We're going to be doing a list, some search, and then individual. We're going to push that into a service, which then we consume in a page that retrieves the information. That service can then be reused on multiple pages to retrieve the same source of information. We're going to use the Pokemon API, which is an open API that any of you can code along with. I'm going to be using Angular as the primary language to be doing the data retrieval. If you've hopefully seen one of the previous videos, as this is a series, so watching this one in isolation, it may not be as useful. The Poke API has got limited access, but check it out. I think it's a pretty easy way and everyone loves Pokemon. All right, let's get into the coding. If you're following along, you'll recognize the folder structure, etc. If not, check out the video above here, which is the last one, or the series to go from the start. But basically, it's a Angular Ionic project. We have a couple of pages and a service and an event service bus. The app's actually running here on the left-hand side. Here's the home page with just some material UI component, just hard-coded in. We have a right nav, which is triggered, and then we have a left navigation nav, okay? And currently that's just a writer link, which means it's just telling the writer to change, and it's not also impacting the behavior of this side menu. Now we might change that in the future, but today's video and the focus for today is to retrieve information from the Poke API. So let's have a look. Okay, the Pokemon API, here we go. All right, this is a consumption only API. You can run your own. So this is more for a tutorial. I would not necessarily use this API in a production system. I might run my own version of this API to ensure that I don't get throttled if anyone actually uses my system, but we can worry about that anyway. The short of it is, we're gonna look for some Pokemon. So let's go get some Pokemon. All right, Pokemon groups. I don't want Pokemon groups, I want the actual Pokemon. Pokemon. Okay. So I reckon we can just do Pokemon. Eggs, characters, stats. Is it stats? No, here we go, Pokemon. Oh, it's just alphabetical order. Okay, here we go. So we have V2 Pokemon. All right, well then the first thing I would do is I would create a service to retrieve the Pokemon. Now we create a service because we want to centralize that data retrieval, that API access, so that it is a reusable service, reusable part through the rest of our app. You don't really want to be writing the code to retrieve that information over and over and over again, because if you make a mistake in it in one location, you might miss fixing it in other parts, and then you have sort of drift of code. So it's much better to have what's called a single responsibility pattern, where you put all of the things that deal with the API in one location and then use that throughout your application. So that's what we're going to do today. CD app, where are we? CD source app services, and then I'm going to just use the CLI, so it's going to be Ionic generate service Pokemon. Okay, I think that'll work. Okay, generated a service. And here we go. It's actually generated a test as well, a spec file for that service, and generated this service. As you can see, we manually created this event bus service rather than using the CLI, the command line integration, which just makes lives easier in your terminal window command run. So in here, you'll see this service exists. It's injectable, but it doesn't have any information in it. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to use an API, which means we will need to add a HTTP client, because after all, we're going to use a HTTP. We're going to call HTTP. Okay, so then we'll need to import this. Come on, auto imports. Let me just. I have this text zoomed in to make it a little bit easier to read, but we'll see how that goes. So let's just go Ionic serve. Before we go too much further, I'll import this into. I'll import this service into my Pokemon page. Into the pages Pokemon page logic code. So in here, we currently have the event bus, as we can see, and then the next thing I will want to add is the private. Private, as in it's not accessible outside of this component. Pokemon service. Am I gonna call it service? Yeah, I will. Pokemon service. Okay, and then that's going to, let's import it. Now that's going from a top level. I don't really like that. I much prefer to be doing a relative, because if I wanted to move something around, it's a little bit easier. I just don't like the route level access, but it still worked. I don't know if there's an issue with the way it was done, but this is my preference, so that's what I'm going with. Right, so this Pokemon service in the Pokemon page. Okay. So right now, if I do this, it will probably fail, and it'll fail for a very valid reason, which is the fact that I don't think I have imported the HTTP module yet. So are we running? If we do this, it's still building. Let's have a drink. Alright, so it's not completing yet. It'll probably complete when I try to enter into Pokemon, because it's lazy loaded. Yeah, it's not going in. So I'd say we have an issue. And if I remember correctly, the issue is the fact that we have not imported the HTTP client module anywhere. So the first place we want to import it is in the app module. As you can see, we have not imported the HTTP client module. Now, modules are just, think of them like a bucket, a mechanism to HTTP client module. There you go. So now if I save that, we can see that this HTTP common, which we use to access an API, needs to be added in. And we do this because we don't want to have a bloated application. We only want to bring in the parts that we actually need. Angular is a very big framework, which has lots of functionality, significantly more than some of the other frameworks. Like I do use React a lot, and I like React, but at the same time I get frustrated that React doesn't have everything that Angular has, and I have to keep going to different projects to bring it in. So I still really like the completeness of a product like Angular that allows me to build awesome applications. Let's actually finish the service before I go any further. Pokemon module. I have got my open editor. Poka service. Poka, Pika, Pika. Where are we? There we go. Service. So the first thing I would do here is create a private constant of a server URL, because I really don't want to have lots of strings repeated over and over through the application. We'll go back to here, grab the Pokemon service, copy. This is the simplistic Pokemon. Okay. All right, and then the next thing I would say is I will have a public fetch list, which will just do a base load
as in call the API without doing anything else. So I will use the HTTP client, yep. And then I will just get this dot server URL. And what that should do is that will call this base URL without any values. And because this is a REST URL, that will just do a list function, and it will then return us back a set of data. Now, if we have a look at what comes back in our data, you'll see that the pattern for this API, and it's different for every API, so you need to look at the API you're going to consume. But this one is actually using a URL for additional information. So let's say when I get this list, and I know the list is actually not got a lot of information per Pokemon, more or less just the name and then a URL to go get more information. So in that instance, I'll just take that URL and I will then, from the first API, to use to do a second request. So to do that, I will do a, it's not really fetch. Anyway, we'll just call it fetch. Public fetch by URL. Okay, and then I'll take the URL as a string, and we will basically just do the same thing again, but with the public URL. So I don't necessarily know what this URL is going to be from a service perspective. It could be a completely different endpoint. Like if you think about it, this first one is going to get the information, and it may say this secondary piece of information is somewhere else on the internet, like an AWS endpoint, for example. Say it's a public S3 asset, then this will still work because it's telling me where the other thing is. All right, so we have fetch list and fetch URL. Now, if we come back to the Pokemon page, we will want to show in the Pokemon page some data. All right, so in the Pokemon page, now in Angular, I think we've done this before, we have an onInit method. Let me just close that so we get a little bit more visible space. We have this lifecycle method, right? So onInit is the initiation of the component. Now we can look at Angular lifecycles, and you have these hooks that you can do. As you can see here, lifecycle hooks are called after Angular has initialized all data-bound properties of a directive, and it can be used for anything else. So if you want an initial load of data, for example, when you hit a page, that component could be reused. So if you wanted to refresh every time you enter sort of this URL, then putting something in your onInit makes sense. And they normally have this interface of an onInit with an ng onInit, really trying to show that ng is an Angular function, lifecycle function, and their definitive names. So in this one, what we will do is we'll need to hold the Pokemon somewhere. So let's call it Pokemon list. Now it doesn't really have to be a Pokemon list. Like this could be anything. But if we're doing a list page, we normally have a data object that holds the data that is being rendered, so we can iterate over it, etc. And there's a slight separation from the components that are used to display the screen, and then the population. I really don't like personally taking stuff directly from an API and pushing it into the service. Sorry, pushing it directly into a request without going through some functions. Not sure if that makes sense. So anyway, we have a Pokemon list. The next thing we would want to do is wipe that Pokemon list if it's not been wiped before. So we want to clear it to do a fresh list in case we've got something else. So then we'll take the Pokemon service, and we will say fetch list. And because this is Angular, we will use the ngx subscribe stuff. So subscribe, subscribe, and we will use subscribe Pokemon, and that will give us a list of Pokemon that we will process. Okay, so this is so let's say Pokemons, and that will be an array of any type. Okay, so now we will put that in brackets because we're TypeScripting it. because it is an array of results that we get, I believe. We'll see in a sec. Subscribe, blah, blah, blah. So then the first thing I would normally do when I'm working with a brand new array is I would normally do like a console out.log, and then I would say, you know, Pokemon list, as in what I'm populating, so that I can read it in the console, and then the value that is being passed through, Pokemons, okay? Okay, so that will now, when we go to the page, it should load the data and display it in the console. It's not bound to the screen, and there's no bounding to any visuals. So we're not going to see anything, but because we've got the console in the browser, we can actually jump in here and have a look. All right, so I'm just going to put the console on now. Yeah, we'll put it back to a phone. That might be easier visually as well. So let's go to the console and let's go to Pokemon. All right. Now, what you may notice is that did not work. And why did that not work? Because you'll notice up here with this dot in Visual Studio, I have to save in order for this to rebuild. So then you'll see this recompiling down here. So it's done. Now you'll see we're back on it's reloaded the Pokemon page, and you can see the Pokemon list. So this is what do we have in the Pokemon list? We have a count. We have the next page as it's showing us the page, the previous page, and a set of results. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So that was going to hold the Pokemon list. So let's add these additional parameters because they may be useful. Pokemon count. Pokemon next URL. Which is a string, and Pokemon on previous URL, which is a string. Okay, so that's pretty useful. Now, when I get this data, I can now say, I'm going to process this Pokemon. I might change that to just say, because it's not actually an array. It's a dict data structure. Now I could create a type for the definition of this to correctly type this, but I'm not going to go into that at the minute. So I'm just going to change this to say results, result, because that is the result of the query. And we'll put that there so it still works the way it used to. Now we might start doing the population of these data. So that is a number. Oops. Number, and this is a list. This is actually an array of any. Okay. Now we're setting it here, so let's set the other, reset the other things. Pokemon count. And why do we do this? Is because this component potentially could have already been rendered, and we may, for example, also add some searching. So then you don't want to come in and have state from a previous run, which is incorrect. Okay, and you can see from the API, or you can more or less infer that the next and previous will only be populated if they exist. Okay, so we can page through the 20 values which are there. So then I will populate these from the result, and that will be, what's it called in here? Result.results. Result.results. Can't type results. Pokemon will be result.count. Result dot what's it called? Then this result dot next. Result dot next and result dot previous. Now, some people may ask why I don't just take the results and put that in a data object itself rather than breaking it out to have a list, a count, a next, and a previous. Well, the reality is this API could change, and I don't want the API, the detail of that API, to bleed through into my application. I could go to a different supplier for this information, or they could just change the names of some of these. Now I know that when we talk about the actual Pokemons in the result, as you can see here, it's really just a name and a URL. Now I could really be typing these, but I'm just trying to show you what I would do and why I would do it. If I'm doing an external API, is there value in that? Potentially. It just depends the seriousness of this application. If this is a validation or a really early stage approach at an idea, doing gold plating engineering, well, gold plating is probably not the best way to describe it, but doing high quality engineering of everything takes more time. And if you're trying to do more validation, think of it more like I'm getting a tent sometimes to see if this is the right spot to live before I come along later, refactor and replace that tent with a brick house, okay, or a wooden house, wherever you live. But I just want to run through some of the bits with you, because that we might have paging. So the paging on those states, I prefer to have a localized variable rather than taking a result coming from something else. Okay, so now if I refresh, these should be populated. Okay. But so now we have the data being brought in, and we have these local parameters set for this given page. But we've got nothing on the screen yet. We really don't. So I want to add some stuff on the screen. Now, what are we going to add? We could do a loading state, which is generally recommended when we're doing some data. So let's add a loading function. So not in the service, in the page. Guess we'll worry about that later. Pokemon page. So let's do a Boolean loading data. Make that a Boolean. Okay, so we can do some slightly different behavior based on that. So before I do this data retrieval, I'll do this dot loading equals true. Okay. And then once it's finished, I'll do this dot loading equals false. Okay. Now, realistically, there's a subscribe. And there's also an error catch, which is if there is a problem of some error of some description, and in that instance, there's a catch. God, I can't remember. Angular. You can tell I do multiple languages and I get confused sometimes. Angular subscribe error. I can't remember if it was just error, not catch. Error handling tutorial. See, everyone does this. So if you don't know how to Google, you're never going to be able to code. Right. Bum 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 bum. They're doing a pipe in the results and they're doing a catch error there. Okay. That makes sense. Actually, I'm not worried about it now. It doesn't matter for this example. We'll come back to it later. If this API doesn't work, that loading state will just sit there. All right. But normally, I'll go to the effort of adding, rather than just a subscription, I'll add an error handler. So this is the successful path, okay, being the result. Oh yeah, I just do the being this result, and then there's an error handler to catch it. And we're just doing that so we can turn the loading state off, because the first thing I would normally do is I would go back to Material UI, which is the primary UI component library that we're using. Material UI, no, yes, I use React, but I want the Angular one today. Here we go. Alright, so they'll have a spinner when you're doing data retrieval, you want to let the user know that there's some sort of progress spinner happening. There we go, basic progress spinner, that'll do. So let's get this HTML mat spinner. Okay, mat spinner, progress spinner, and mat spinner. Examples, what examples have we got? Oh, that's the progress where I can see how long it's going to take. That's beneficial if you've got multi-steps and you know how long it's going to take, but we're indeterminate. So with an indeterminate one, we don't know, so it's going to continue all the time. So that will set that probably as an indeterminate progress spinner mode, and then mode was that indeterminate. We'll just use the basic one. Realistically, basic progress spinner is fine because we're not going to change the behavior of the spinner in this example. So on this Pokemon page, boom, let's put a spinner, and ng if floating equals true. Right, let's have a look what that does. Oh, loaded too quick. Alright, let's say if loading equals false, just to see what it looks like. Okay, so we're not seeing this. Is the mat spinner? I don't see any issues here. Right, I'm on the Pokemon. Oh, same issue again. Did not hit the save button. Save. So I must have been out of focus when I did the shortcut to save. And here we go. Mat spinner. Unexpected. Oh, that's because when I wanted to save it, I must have typed over. So let's take the mat spinner and see what happens now. Let's go to the Pokemon page. And that doesn't look good. Equals. Did I call it loading? Let's just take this ng off a sec. Make sure the mat spinner is working before I review my logic. There we go. Here's the mat spinner. So now, let me just double check. What did I call it? Loading data. That's why it didn't work, because it was never any of those values. Loading data equals false. It's done. Now we make it equals true. Probably really should do 3. Does that work? You can see it there. Now, it's running really quickly, but when you're on a mobile phone network, it's generally a little slower unless you've got 5G. 5G is generally a little bit faster than your home internet, at least in Australia it is. But I look forward to the day of Starlink in everyone's house. Alright, so that loader will show if it's loading. And then the next thing we'll do is maybe show a list. Let's have a look. What component are we going to look? So what I like to do is get this functionally working first, and then we'll go from there. All right, here we go. Here, this could work. Action lists with some action. Oh, this looks about right. Let's have a look at the examples. See if there's an action list. Sections, list with selections, single list. List with sections, basic list. All right, well, let's try this action list. Action list, okay. So, let's close this again so you get a little bit more visibility. Let's paste this in. So let's say if loading data is false, which means the table has finished loading. What we will do then is, if we look up here, you'll see this this list item for each. So we might just change this to be a Show info link. That looks pretty close to what we want. So in the list, action list and nav list. Yeah, that actually looks like basically what we want to do. I will jump back to the other page a sec, double check that I've called it. You might wonder why I keep doubling back to double check when I call stuff, because I make mistakes so often, and it's much quicker just to do a quick double check of a variable name than it is to carry on coding and then have to try to debug it. Okay, so let's just see what this looks like. Okay. Do I want a button? I wonder what this is going to look like. So the button content will be Pokemon.name. We remember that from the Pokemon that's coming in, which is going to be this result. So what data do I have access to? At this point I only have the name and a URL. So let's just do this for a sec and I'll save and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, I've made a mistake somewhere. Not list, item button. If for, I'm not sure what that issue is yet. Hold up. Pokemon. Alright. Escaped. Oh, sorry. Using the wrong syntax. I was doing React yesterday. Okay. Go. Back to Pokemon. And there we go. Here's 20 pages. Now, does that count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So there's a few there. So as you can see that there's no links yet, or no scrolling, but that we can just turn on later. But what we will do in this instance, because they're buttons and they're lists, is when you click it, we actually want something to happen.
Hello YouTube, it's Darren, later editing. That video is getting a little long, so I'm trying to keep my videos around half an hour, so I'm going to cut that now as we have a data retrieval working. We're going to continue this and put some pagination, etc. in, so we're not finished here, but I want to keep those as a more manageable chunk, and I don't want to take up too much of your day. I hope through this you can also launch something awesome. Have a great day. Ciao. Can I launch products on the internet that make money? You'll have to follow me to find out. Then hit the subscribe button and join me on my journey.